Word to your mom, I come to Tron Bonne. It's the Misadventures of Tron Bonne on Boy Works Gaiden.
You'll never want for companionship.
By patron request this week, we have another Mega Man game. Although, is it really a Mega Man game if Mega Man only puts in a tiny cameo appearance? The actual character Mega Man shows up on screen in this game for less time than Mario does in Super Mario Land 3, and that's really saying something. This is not a Mega Man sequel. It's not even a Mega Man spinoff. No, it's the prequel to a Mega Man spinoff, a state of existence so arcane it puts the Wonder Boy family tree to shame. Capcom produced the Misadventures of Tron Bonne during an unusually fertile time in the history of the Mega Man franchise. That may seem difficult to imagine in the here and now when Capcom can barely bother to grudgingly produce a single new Mega Man title once every decade or so, but at the end of the 1990s, the franchise was booming. The Misadventures of Tron Bonne is but one facet of that boom, and despite its tenuous connection to the NES game that started it all, this was not the cause of the franchise's collapse. In defiance of all probability, Misadventures is a wonderful little game loaded with quality gameplay and an abundance of charm. And as a prequel to Mega Man Legends, it helped set the stage for both that game and the proper sequel that followed soon after. As the title explains, the focus here is not on Mega Man himself, but rather on his rivals, the air pirate family known as the Bonnes. More specifically, it focuses on the family's middle child, the cute-as-a-button, hyper-violent teen genius Tron Bonne, and of course, her legion of 40 robotic minions known as the Servbots. While the other Bond siblings do appear here, they functionally serve the traditional video game damsel in distress role, though in this case, it's the damsel who sets out to rescue her brothers. She goes about this violently, and with a combination of wanton larceny and advanced robotics. The Misadventures of Tron Bonne is a game that defies a lot of video game standards and expectations, and it's all the better for it. In looking back at Mega Man Legends earlier this year, I mentioned that the overall feel of the world owes a tremendous debt to Studio Ghibli's Laputa, Castle in the Sky. And in several respects, Tron is basically a teenage version of air pirate boss Dola. Misadventures is a bit like what you'd have gotten if Ghibli had decided to tell the story of Dola and her crew before they met Shita and Pazu, but with box-pushing puzzles. The game tees up its premise in short order. The action begins in medias res, with the oldest Bond brother Teasel ranting briefly before stomping into battle against various oversized robotic guardians as he delves for treasure in a set of ancient ruins. Teasel's mech-powered tomb raiding is stopped short by a man named Glide, an enforcer for a criminal boss, Lex Loth, who had lent Teasel an inordinate sum of money to construct the family airship Gesellschaft and has decided to collect. Lacking the cash to repay the debt and the combat skills to avoid the ultimate Glide laser, Teasel and his brother Bond are thrown into a debtor's prison of sorts, and Tron sets out to earn the cash to pay their ransom. 1 million zinni. Tron, being a kid who lives on a mobile airship, can't really earn that much cash with a part-time job. She does, however, have an aptitude for mechanics and robotics, which means she can instead liberate the money from the good people of Ryship Island. The Misadventures of Tron Bonne then tells the story of a young woman driven to a life of extreme crime for the noble cause of family. It's like Yakuza, but created back when Toshihiro Nagoshi hadn't yet turned into orange leather and was still workshopping ideas about a monkey rolling around in a plastic ball. These crime sprees play out through the same gameplay engine that powered Mega Man Legends, and it makes use of similar mechanics and controls. Coming between Legends and Legends 2 in terms of its release date, it looks a little better than the first game and offers somewhat more modern controls, including a 2-stick configuration. But the underlying tech still isn't quite up to the standards of Legends 2. Since Tron is just a normal girl, she doesn't participate in the action on foot. Sometimes she doesn't even go on missions herself, sending a remote-controlled drone in her place. Instead, Tron pilots an oversized armored mech called the Gustav. While the Gustav's basic controls are pretty similar to those of Mega Man and Legends, the two feel very different. Gustav is slower and less agile than Mega Man will admit, but it's more heavily armored. It plows through minor enemies and typically faces threats that would have been mid-boss caliber enemies for Mega Man. Gustav can also be upgraded with additional armor plating, larger energy tanks, and alternate weapons. You can customize its appearance to a certain degree with different paint jobs. Another critical factor to Gustav's combat efficiency are the Servbots. Up to 6 Servbots tag along when Tron goes out raiding, with another assigned as co-pilot for the armor. And the co-pilot has a material impact on the mech's performance. Still, even if the action feels largely consistent with that of Legends and Legends 2, the overall flow of Misadventures gameplay is entirely its own. Rather than follow Tron through a single on-foot adventure, Misadventures plays out through small missions across 4 different modes, with Gesellschaft serving as a hub for mission planning gear upgrades, and managing the light simulation elements of the game. Of the various gameplay modes, the action sequences feel the most like Mega Man Legends. There are 2 phases for all the missions, and the action missions vary the most between the first and second half of the game. In action missions, Tron pilots the Gustav directly with the help of half a dozen servbots. Her first set of sorties sees her venturing into the more populated areas of Ryship Island in an attempt to raid the city's bank, while the second, less interesting phase sees her stealing livestock from the island's farm areas. Both phases are basically an exercise in shooting, smashing, and stealing, both directly and indirectly. Everything Tron blasts apart while in the Gustav yields cash, and anything she can't steal herself can be pilfered by the servbots. The Gustav contains one critical feature Mega Man lacked: a lock-on beacon bomb that directs the servbots' attention to specific targets. Servbots can target just about anything. Send them toward a loose pile of cash or loot drops and they'll gather them for you. Fire at the open door of a building and they'll raid the interior of all its valuables before you break down the structure and collect even more resources. Send them toward the scenery and they'll shake loose helpful items. Target police cars and they'll chop shop the vehicles on the spot, stripping away tires and lights. And if you target enemies, they'll harass your foes, either stunning them for a moment or knocking them unconscious and taking them out of the fight. Servbots are semi-autonomous and will fight on their own, but they work best when given guidance with Tron's beacon bombs. Misadventures kind of front-loads these features in the early action stages, which are dense with buildings, police, and obstructions. If there's a flaw to the game, it's that none of the subsequent missions live up to the gleeful anarchy of battling across the island to raid the bank. Tron develops 2 rivals over the course of the game. First, there's Lex's enforcer Glide, who also pilots a mech and has his own armada of Surbot-like minions called Birdbots. Meanwhile, her raids attract the wrath of Denise, a rookie cop who frets about her tendency to be a screw-up, a form of anxiety Tron's constant, successful raids do little to quell. Denise features heavily in Misadventures' artwork and marketing, which suggests she was meant to play a bigger part in the game. In fact, the bare-bones nature of some of the later portions of the game give the feeling that it ran up against time and budget limits. This is definitely a less extravagant game than the core Legends titles, with the story playing out through static pop-up portraits rather than fully cinematic 3D cutscenes. Despite feeling like a B-tier budgetary line item, Misadventures doesn't feel like a B-tier production. The creator's love for this world and its characters shines through despite the obvious cracks showing in the game's facade. Tron and her servbots are surprisingly well realized, and the gameplay, while often minimalist, offers impressive variety and depth. Overall, depending on how much you invest into the systems and options, Misadventures can be nearly twice as long a game as the original Legends. And even if the action scenes peter out once you reach the farm and spend your time trying to chase off birdbots while guiding cattle across large empty fields, you always have the freedom to jump into the game's other modes for variety. For example, the puzzle mode puts Tron's mech into a completely unconventional role. Here, your objective is to raid a series of warehouse docks, stealing cargo by loading it into your boat. The puzzle sequences feel like Son of Sokoban, which is why I've stuck it under Game Boy Works. You're toting boxes around a grid. It's not pure Sokoban, of course, because you're not pushing crates, you're lifting them. Therein the puzzle lies. Tron's armor has only limited power for manual labor like this, and each stage limits the number of times you can lift crates, as well as the number of grid spaces you can move while burdened with a crate. There are 4 different kinds of crate to manage here. Green crates are your targets, and you need to abscond with all 4 of them to complete each stage. Wooden crates are lightweight enough that lifting them counts against your lift allocation, but you can move them as many spaces as you need. On the other hand, steel crates are so heavy you can only pivot in place while holding them. Gustav can't tote them around. And finally, each stage contains 1 red crate, which is functionally identical to the green crates but works strictly as an optional bonus pickup worth tons of extra cash, if you can figure out how to load it onto your boat without missing any mandatory green crates. The first wave of puzzle stages keeps things pretty simple, with generous lift and carry limits and a minimum of puzzle elements within the level layout. However, by the time you reach the final set of these stages, they'll have grown dramatically in complexity. The later stages involve cranes, conveyor belts, and other interactive elements that really force you to combine all available options in clever and creative ways. Fortunately, you don't need to complete these stages on your own. You do have 1 servbot companion to help out. Mostly the servbot follows you around and gets underfoot, but you can ask it for advice when you're feeling stumped. The quality of advice you receive varies depending on the servbot's intelligence. A bot with a poor brain rating will give you useless advice, while one with maxed out intellect can be a great asset. However, it's in RPG mode where the servbots truly shine. These scaled-down action sequences aren't an RPG in the Final Fantasy sense of the word. There's no turn-based combat, and not much of anything to equip. These are RPG sequences in more of a wizardry sense, a first-person dungeon crawl where you encounter other characters and attempt to puzzle your way through various traps and secrets. While there are several RPG levels, they're all built around the same set of caverns, and you reveal new passages and puzzles as you advance. Tron is more or less a passive observer in these sequences, using a remote-controlled drone as her proxy within the maze, while a small squad of servbots do her bidding and interact directly with NPCs. These levels are about 50% navigating mazes, 10% solving puzzles and trying to overcome dungeon guardians, and 40% listening to the servbots chat with other explorers about the secrets of the underground. These sequences are pretty lightweight affairs. You generally solve puzzles by sending the indestructible servbots through various traps and hazards, watching them struggle to disarm flames or shut down machines by enduring those abuses long enough to hit a prominent and obvious switch. The dungeon NPCs tend to be chatty, except one sultry lady who speaks in one-word responses, and they more or less explain how to make your way through to the end of the labyrinth. And enemy encounters are necessarily simple, since your drone has very little direct stopping power and limited durability, meaning you need to be able to win by aiming your servbots at the issue du jour. It's not amazing or deep, but I don't think that's the point of RPG mode. Rather, it functions more as a substitute for the town areas of the Legends games. Since you use the Bonne airship as your hub, the RPG mode gives you a chance to interact with the citizens of the world in a mostly peaceful setting, hence the RPG moniker. This portion of the game lives and dies by the quality of the writing and localization, which, fortunately, fare well. They're a bit on the childish side, yes, but being suitable for and accessible to all ages is hardly the worst crime a video game could commit. And childish doesn't mean immature or imbecilic here, merely good-natured yet confident in its own purpose. The natural counterpart to RPG mode is free mode. If the RPG levels are the equivalent of Mega Man strolling through Cadillacs' central town, free mode is analogous to a journey through that game's digger-only subterranean gates. Unlike the other modes, free isn't divided into missions, and you have only one objective: liberate Diana's Tear, a massive and massively valuable refractor gem that will take you most of the way toward paying off the Bonne family's debt to Lex Loth. Despite its lack of overt structure, the ruins of free mode nevertheless require Tron to make multiple forays before she can complete the sequence. There are multiple natural barriers throughout the ruins, including walled-up passages that can only be broken through with advanced weaponry. And as it turns out, the schematics and parts for that weaponry tend to be located within the ruins. Completing free mode requires a process of venturing into the dungeon, finding critical objectives and tools, then returning to the Gesellschaft to re-equip them before hitting the labyrinth again. The ruins also contain interesting odds and ends beyond treasures and monsters. There are some simple environmental puzzles to be solved by guiding the servbots, and occasionally you'll come across mini-bosses, rigged rooms, natural traps, and even the odd tree that can be shaken for a one-time health boost deep inside the maze. At the end of the dungeon lurks a giant reaverbot, a giant hippo-like monstrosity that thrashes about its lair before sending streams of goons and flurries of bubbles after you. It's seemingly invincible outside its mouth, which it rarely opens to present a target of opportunity. Naturally, you need to coax it to open its mouth, which you do by ordering the servbots to crawl into its nostrils, forcing it to sneeze. It's simultaneously a deadly challenge and goofy as all hell, which seems only fitting for the Misadventures of Tron Bonne. Altogether, these 4 different modes use the same basic game engine to present a varied experience that hits on all the key factors of Legends in very different ways. But they're ultimately only about half the totality of the Misadventures of Tron Bonne, because the heart of the game and a great deal of its playtime revolves around the Gesellschaft itself. Between missions, Tron spends her time in the Bonne family airship, managing a sort of base simulation scenario. The Gesellschaft is a massive vehicle containing nearly a dozen different areas, and Tron's 40 servbots populate the ship. Each servbot has distinct traits, which includes both 4 stat-based skill categories, and for many servbots, a special ability. Each servbot's common stats are rated from 1 to 4. Strength, their physical power in combat sequences; speed, how quickly they respond to Tron's orders and run; brain, which is mainly useful for puzzle mode hints and unlocking unique skills; and sloth, which is a negative stat that rises when a servbot is left sitting too long rather than going on missions. You can boost each stat in different ways. Brain stats often increase by sending servbots on successful missions, while speed and strength need to be improved, and sloth needs to be burned away through training via minigames, or in the case of sloth, in the torture room. You can also improve the 3 beneficial stats by giving a servbot a rare point-boosting cube item, which are usually found by sending inactive servbots on scouting expeditions while Tron is out on a mission. Servbot stats and skills are part of a fairly intricate interlocking system that runs throughout the Misadventures of Tron Bonne, and gives it quite a bit more depth beyond simply being a collection of bite-sized action game concepts. Not all servbots have special or hidden skills, but those that do are a great help. The bots that specialize in weapon and gear creation in the development room can make the Gustav mech stronger as you acquire plans, parts, and cash in dungeon. Sniper serve bots make your best Gustav pilots, with a handful of snipers available specializing differently in either strength or speed. On the other hand, serve bots with secondary skills like music or art don't do much to aid you in combat, but they open up customization features like alternate background tunes in the Gesellschaft or custom paint colors for the Gustav. In order to open up these abilities, you need to chat with the serve bots on the Gesellschaft to learn their personalities and discover their specialties. You take physically adept serve bots with you on missions, where you acquire resources to sell off and key items for developing new skills or activating latent serve bot powers. You give resources to technically minded serve bots to create better gear for Gustav, allowing you to take on more advanced challenges. Your serve bots grow in power and skill as you complete action sequences, making them more useful in combat and puzzles, and unlocking more of the Gesellschaft and its features. The more downtime you spend about the Gesellschaft between missions, the more you'll benefit in action sequences, and the more serve bot skills you activate. And the more serve bot skills you activate, the more efficient and capable you and your robot kids become. And then there's the favorite serve bot feature, which you designate by giving that bot a special red head parts item. While this seems superfluous, it's essential once you reach the end of the game. Midway through Misadventures, you'll manage to earn enough cash to pay Teasel and Bonne's ransom, at which point Loth scoffs and triples his payment demands due to compound interest. Once you pull together that additional sum, Loth still refuses to set his prisoners free and throws Tron in jail as well.
Oh! Let me go! Yeah!
At that point, the servbots are left alone, which prompts the designated favorite to overcome the servbots' innate helplessness and venture out to rescue the Bonnes on his own. For the final mission, the favorite servbot pilots the Gustav into the prison dungeon, at least until you rescue the family. At that point, they all cram into the tiny cockpit in order to undermine Loth's schemes, which revolve around unearthing a skyscraper-sized Reaverbot to use as a lever for ransoming the entire world. Weirdly, this is almost exactly the same storyline seen in CyberConnect 2's Tale Concerto, a heavily Mega Man Legends influenced game released a year before Misadventures. I have never been able to find a good explanation for this overlap beyond both very similar games massively ripping off Castle in the Sky. It's just one of those weird things. All in all though, The Misadventures of Tron Bonne is an absolutely wonderful game, a real highlight of the PlayStation library, which itself remains one of the most experimental and innovative catalogs ever seen on any gaming platform. While a spinoff of a rapidly proliferating franchise that was already tunneling its way into niche status would seem the height of pointlessness, Misadventures justifies its own existence through its winning personality, varied gameplay, and the sim elements woven throughout. It truly is a unique game, and despite clearly being produced on a smaller budget than Legends or Legends 2, it lacks some of their heart. And the Japanese version, at least, is doubly interesting for including a Legends 2 demo disc that featured an exclusive chapter of the game. A bonus sadly dropped for the American demo. Due to its niche status and fairly late arrival in the US, it shipped after Dreamcast, just a few months out from PlayStation 2, Misadventures was seemingly printed in small numbers and has become incredibly expensive. For the moment, at least, it's very affordable as a PS1 classic for play on PlayStation 3 and PSP.
Did it, but you did it.
Sony has really been going out of its way to make old games hard to purchase lately, so now is definitely the time to buy The Misadventures of Tron Bonne digitally and save yourself a few $100s before it's too late. It's not a timeless game, but it's great, it's tons of fun, it's packed with personality, and despite some dated controls and graphics, it just feels good, you know?